It's noon. We've got some people logged in. Let's go ahead and get started.
Sounds good.
I'm April Rozzo, one of Florida Cancer Specialists, registered dietitian. I am going to be hosting the teaching kitchen today. Angie Mathewson is also a dietitian, registered dietitian with Florida Cancer, and she is going to be my moderator today. So if you have any questions as we are going along, please feel free to type them in the chat box. And Angie is keeping an eye on that. So she'll be able to throw out the questions and either she can answer them or I can answer them. We can have a nice discussion about them. We are doing things a little bit differently today. Normally, I have one recipe and we make it from start to finish and cook it, and it's ready to eat by the time it's done. So today we're doing dessert for the summer with fresh fruits, frozen fruits. We're doing a little bit of both. And desserts are not always done so quickly. They take a little bit longer to bake often. So what we're doing, we've got two recipes today because we're going to set up the first one. I'm going to show you how to put it together, and then it bakes for 40 to 45 minutes. So I've got one already done so that you can see it. So we'll put it together. I'll show you what it looks like at the end. And then we're going to make a second recipe, which is just a super quick chilled strawberry soup. Everything goes in the blender, and then it'll be ready to go at the end. So that's why we're doing two recipes today, because we're not fully cooking the first one. It will take a little bit longer. And actually for the first recipe, I've got some butter cubed up. I was keeping it in the fridge because I wanted it to stay cold. So I'm just going to grab that. We'll set it aside for when we need it. So the first thing you would do if you were cooking this, or if you're following along and cooking, is to preheat your oven to 375. And then once that is heating up, we just want to lightly butter a square baking dish, 2 quarts or so. And I just kind of take my stick of butter and just, if you can see in there, again, it's light. It doesn't need to be super heavy all the way around, but just give it a good coat. Make sure you get the sides a little bit.
No, if you wanted to sub, could you sub something else?
You could sub a little bit of Crisco if you've got it. You could sub like some vegan butter. You could do a little olive oil or Pam non-stick spray. Okay. We're just looking for something so that it won't stick to the pan whenever
and
it
that's
comes
going to be
out
true
of
for the, I think I'll probably have that question more for you when you get to the cubed part of the butter.
So the cubed part of the butter is for the crumble that goes on top. So again, you can use like a low fat or a whipped butter or a vegan butter, but you do want something in there to melt that's going to help coat the oats and the brown sugar and the nuts and give it that nice kind of crispy golden brown top. And so for that, you could use less butter, but I would use something rather than just a spray.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was thinking about maybe like a vegan butter or something on that order.
You could absolutely use vegan butter. Yes, for sure. All right. So now that our pan is buttered, I've already started slicing up some nectarines. So for this, and this is why, if you know me, if you have done these cooking videos with us before, you know how much I like a recipe where I can trade out ingredients for what I have on hand or what is in season, which is why this recipe is just called a seasonal fruit crisp, because you can use whatever fruit you want. When I made it the first time, when I was testing it out, I just used all strawberries because that was fresh a month ago. That was in season a couple months ago. So when I went to the store this weekend, nectarines, I have yellow and white nectarines were on sale. Blueberries were on sale. Blackberries were on sale because they're all in season right now. So the one that's already done, the one that I'll show you at the end, I used nectarines and blueberries. And for this one, we're using some blackberries. We're using the nectarines and blackberries. So you make it work for you. Whatever you've got, whatever kind of fruit you like. You could do pears and apples if you wanted to. That would be really good. You could throw some cranberries in the mix if you were doing it like in the winter or fall. So these, nectarines, all fruit, everything we're using today, not only are they really good sources of fiber in the diet, right? We're always talking about eating your fruits and vegetables, getting at least 5 servings a day, 25 or 30 grams of fiber per day for gut health. Fruits and veggies are where we get a lot of those fiber, a lot of that fiber. And blackberries in particular, blackberries and raspberries, have about 8 grams of fiber in 1 cup. That's a lot. Most fruits, the nectarines, the strawberries, we're talking about maybe 3 to 4 grams in a cup. But those blackberries and raspberries, they really add up on the fiber scale. And also, all of these fruits that we're using today are great sources of antioxidants. So those vitamins and minerals that can help boost your immune system and reduce inflammation and maybe help fight cancer or reduce the risk of cancer. We're getting potassium, vitamin A, vitamin C, all of those benefits are coming from these fruits. Some of them even have like B vitamins, like niacin, and our body needs all of that. And you may find sometimes the seeds come away a little bit easier. Sometimes they do not. Please do not cut yourself when you're doing this. I would appreciate it.
No, you're leaving the skin on these.
I am. I'm glad you said that. You certainly can peel the skin off. You are welcome to. I like to leave the skin on for a couple of reasons. Number one, how tedious to like stand.
Yes, that does sound tedious.
It is so much quicker to just leave the skin on, but the bigger reason, the more nutritious reason, is that the skin, oftentimes the skin is where a lot of the fiber is. That's where a lot of your nutrition is in a fruit or a vegetable, is in the skin. So as much as possible, I try to always leave the skin on.
And will the skin get pretty tender? I've honestly never baked a nectarine.
Yes, it gets super tender, very easy to eat. I do the same thing with apples. Like if I put apples in a fruit crisp or in oatmeal, I don't ever peel the apples. I always leave the skin on, and then when you bake it, the skin softens, it eats really easily, and then you're keeping all of that nutrition. So, all right, so we've got our cut up fruit. I'm gonna add the blackberries in here. Get rid of that. And then to this fruit mixture, you guys can see that, I am gonna add 2 tablespoons of sugar, just regular granulated sugar goes in here. We're gonna add a little bit of cinnamon. So this is, I'm using this for both in the fruit mixture and in the crumble. So we're gonna do half. There's a teaspoon total. So a half teaspoon in the fruit and then a half teaspoon in the crumble, okay? So I'm just gonna throw some of that in there and save the rest. We've got some lemon. So we want both. We want the zest and we want some of the juice. And this, whenever you've got a recipe that's really sweet, it's got a lot of sugar in it, having some acid, having the lemon just helps pop the flavor. It just helps brighten it up. That little bit of acid cuts through the sweetness so that it's not too sweet. So we just want the zest of a whole lemon. And I'm just
Definitely zest it before you cut it. I have made that mistake with my HelloFresh.
Yeah.
Mainly due to my miniature sous chef getting excited and cutting it before she sees that we're supposed to zest it. It's a lot easier to zest a whole lemon than a cut up lemon.
Very much is. I have learned that lesson the hard way too.
Yeah.
It's darn near impossible to zest a lemon once it's already cut.
And you're paying for the lemon, zest it, because it is a slightly different flavor than the juice. I was not a believer in this prior to my HelloFresh subscription, but the zest is something different.
It adds such a nice pop of brightness and flavor. So we really want all that goodness. I'm just going to make sure we get all the zest in there. Get that out of the way. And then we don't need a ton of the juice for this recipe. We don't want to saturate it with lemon, just a teaspoon. So that really is half or less of a lemon, depending on how big and how juicy your lemons are. So I'm too lazy to get a measuring spoon, but just a teaspoon, little teaspoon of lemon juice, okay? And then the whole lemon zested goes in there in the mix, okay? And then one more thing, cornstarch. So 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Let me make sure it's 2. Yep, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch goes right in there. And I'm going to mix this all up so it doesn't really matter how it dumps in there. The cornstarch is a thickener. So when you bake all this fruit, it's going to release its juices in the casserole. And if you don't have something to thicken it, it's just going to look like soup. It's, the juice is just going to be real soupy in the bottom of the pan. And then you're not going to get all those flavors and goodness when you.
And we're making the soup next. This is the crisp, not the soup.
This is the crisp. This is not supposed to be soupy, right? So the sugar, the cinnamon adds some flavor, helps bring out that natural flavor, the sweetness. The sugar is going to help to start to release some of those natural juices from the fruit. And then the cornstarch is going to help to thicken it once it cooks.
So are you saying the sugar has kind of a food science or kind of chemical role? It's not just to add sweetness?
Exactly. And now if you're using a really tart fruit like raspberries, you might want to add a little bit more sugar. But the blackberries, the nectarines, they're so sweet on their own. You really don't need to add a lot of sugar. We're adding a little bit of sweetness, but we're mainly using it to help bring out those juices from the fruit. Okay. So we're going to let that just sit and marinate while we make our topping. So we'll get that out of the way. Now for the crisp topping, we've got oats. We've got a half cup of oats. We've got a 1/4 cup of just all-purpose flour. You could also use whole wheat flour. That would be another way to substitute and add a little extra nutrition. You could even do half and half, a couple tablespoons of all-purpose, a couple tablespoons of whole wheat. But whole wheat flour, 100% whole wheat flour would go great in this recipe. So we're going to put that in with our oats. The other half teaspoon of cinnamon goes in here. We've got a 1/4 cup of brown sugar and a 1/4 cup of chopped pecans. Obviously, if you have nut allergies or any kind of issues, you can leave those out. That's totally optional. I like having the nuts. It adds a little bit of flavor and it adds a nice crunch into the topping.
And its own antioxidant and pheno profile.
And then to this, we are also going to add just a tiny little pinch of salt for a couple of reasons. The salt it enhances the sweetness, enhances the flavor, while at the same time balancing it out so that it, just like the acid in the fruit, the salt kind of helps cut the sweetness a little bit and just helps round out the flavor. So just a pinch, just a little bit. And then to this mixture, we're going to add the butter. So this is where you could use your vegan butter if you preferred.
Right.
just
And
two
like if you're making a
tablespoons.
pie crust or a cookie, like real butter does necessary things to it, but this crisp
Right,
is maybe a little bit more flexible.
exactly. It is not quite as temperamental as a pie crust.
Right.
Yes. Hmm.
We have a question about whether you toasted the nuts first or roasted them.
I did not, just for convenience and time's sake, but you absolutely can. Toasting them just helps bring out more flavor. It gives it a really nice, deep nuttiness. So you absolutely can toast them. But also keep in mind, it's going in the oven and the top
Yeah.
is going to get toasted in the oven.
Yeah. And that was Leslie's question was, or no, because you're baking them.
You don't really need to
Yeah.
because you're baking them. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, to mix this butter in, here's what we're looking for. We're looking for coarse meal. It almost looks like pebble. So you can do it a couple of different ways. You can use a pastry cutter, right? This is, I don't even know how old this is. I think this was my grandmother's pastry cutter.
Does
So
look
you
like
can
that.
use this and cut the butter in until you break it up into all those little pieces. You can use a couple of forks and kind of work it back and forth. I think it's easier to just put your hands in there and start mashing up the butter and mixing it in to the flour, sugar, oat mixture. You just want to start breaking it, right? And get it all mixed in with the flour and the sugar. And this way, you can make sure that the butter is in tiny little pieces. You can make sure that you're getting it coated with the flour, sugar mixture. And then you can feel it to kind of know when it's reached that pebbly, coarse phase, that stage that we want it to be at.
And I think it's more satisfying. And my 9-year-old sous chef really enjoys I cut it up into like little pea-sized pieces.
Yes, yes.
And she loves to squish them.
Yes.
Leslie must have Chef John. I'm assuming it's what her other half says. He uses frozen butter. Leslie says he uses frozen. Have you ever had it frozen when you take it out?
You can, yeah. And the frozen just helps keep it really cold and chilled so that it doesn't melt too quickly. And that's the idea. You want it as cold as possible so that it doesn't melt too quickly and kind of dissolve and evaporate. So yes, you absolutely can put it in the freezer. At that point, the pastry cutter might be a little bit easier depending on how hard the butter is and how small you cut it up. But yes, and that's why I kept it in the fridge until like right before I needed it. Okay. So you can see here that it's kind of crumbly, right? So that's good to go. And now we're just going to build our casserole. We're good on time. Just checking. Okay. So let me get my pan that we buttered. And so we're going to start with the fruit. And we're just going to dump it all in this pan. Don't worry if it looks like it's not all going to fit because it is going to cook down.
And I have tried this too. Joyce says that we got a butter discussion going on. She says she has used a grater when it's frozen. So yeah, and I've seen that too. I haven't tried that. My daughter has done that when I wasn't looking.
Yes, and frankly, if you freeze the butter first, then the grater is a really good option. The grater is a great way to go. To then take that butter out of the freezer, grate it, and then it'll really help break it up, and get it mixed into all of that oat goodness.
That really looks pretty, April.
Thank you. So then we're going to take our mixture and you're just going to sprinkle it all evenly on top. We want everything coated. And there will be plenty to go around. So here's the thing. When you look up recipes for fruit crisp, when you're looking at different fruit crisp recipes, my biggest complaint as a dietitian is that there is always way too much of this. There's always way too much crumble in the recipe. And the whole point of making a crisp is that it's a lightened up, healthier version of a cobbler.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you put all of that crisp in there, all the butter and sugar and everything else that goes in there, and cover the top, you've really not made it any healthier. So anytime I find a recipe online for a fruit crisp, before I ever make it, the first thing I do is cut the recipe in half for the topping.
Nice.
Because there's always too much. So when I created this recipe, I basically looked at a lot of different recipes and their ratios. So when I created this recipe, that was the first thing I did, was to keep the amount of crisp topping reasonable.
I was curious too. I know one of your best tips ever to me is that you can take a recipe and just cut the sugar in half, period, and not replace it. So did you already do that versus the recipes you've seen? Okay.
Most of the recipes that I looked at were like a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup of sugar.
Okay.
And I'm only using 2 tablespoons in the fruit.
Got it.
Yes, when I created this recipe, that's exactly what I did. I kind of just cut everything down that didn't need to be there. And you can see, even cut in half, there is plenty of topping on this. So this is done. It goes in the oven at 375 for 40 to 45 minutes. The fruit will get nice and bubbly. You'll smell it. You'll smell the berries in your house, but it'll get nice and bubbly and juicy, and the topping will get to be a nice golden brown. Okay. So that goes in the oven, and by the magic of television, that's the finished product.
That looks great.
So if we grab this plate and cut into it, you can hear it crisp, you can hear it crunch. There we go.
This is a great question from Leslie. So this one you took out is baked in glass, and the one you just put it in is aluminum. Was there any difference?
It's just the pans that I had.
Like baking time or anything different in your experience?
This, I will say, this one, because the pan was a little bit smaller, it's more deep than it is wide. So this really took a good 45 minutes to get everything cooked and bubbly and crispy.
And how do you know when it's done? Because I am a big fan of the toothpick trick for cakes and brownies. Not going to work here.
It's supposed to be wet, right? Yeah. It truly is. I mean, you can undercook this, but it's really hard. So at 40 minutes, I would open up the oven, and if the fruit is juicy and bubbling, and your topping is a nice deep golden brown, like that, it's done. That's it. The pan that I just made, because it's more shallow, it'll probably only take 40 minutes. This one took a little bit longer because it is deeper. Okay. So yes, but look how good. And it's not soupy because the cornstarch thickened the juices and held them together. It freezes really well. So if you're not taking it to a potluck, because it'll get devoured if you take it to a potluck. But if you're not taking it to a potluck, you can freeze it in little portions. I can pop this in the microwave and reheat it for a little treat after lunch. So it makes great leftovers, lots of options, okay? And then we're just gonna move over here to our food processor. So the fruit crisp is done. We're gonna make a chilled strawberry soup in 5 minutes.
We can do it.
We can do it. So we've got 4 cups of strawberries. Now here's why I like this recipe. I mentioned that strawberries kind of going out of season. You can still get them fresh, but the prices are starting to go back up on them. This recipe is great with frozen strawberries. They do not have to be fresh berries. And you certainly can use other fruit, just like with the crisp. I could have put fresh blueberries in this recipe if I wanted to, but you absolutely can just use frozen and thawed berries for this. And that's what I did. So 4 cups of strawberries, a couple teaspoons of vanilla extract. We've got a cup of non-fat plain Greek yogurt. I really like Fage the bran Fage, that's what this is, because there's not a ton of added sugar in it. Even the flavored, even if you get like the Fage fruit flavored, there's not a ton of added sugar in it, and it's really smooth. So that's just my preference. But you certainly can get whatever brand you like. But this is the 0%. This is fat-free, plain Greek yogurt. We're gonna add a spoonful of honey, tablespoon of honey. And that's, again, that's just to help bring out the sweetness. We're not using a lot. It's 1 tablespoon for this whole big thing, just to bring out the sweetness. And then a 1/2 cup of orange juice. Just like the acid in the fruit crisp, that orange pairs really well with strawberries. It makes a really nice flavor. And you need a little liquid to blend the soup. My orange juice is also calcium and vitamin D fortified, PS. You can get it calcium and vitamin D fortified. And that's it. So that's what goes in. I'm gonna blend it on high until it's all mixed up together. All right. Now you can add, again, I like my versatility. You could add basil. You could throw some fresh basil leaves in here.
I was just thinking about the huge basil and mint bushes that I have at the moment.
You could add a little sprinkling of cinnamon if you wanted to. So this is very plain and straightforward strawberry soup, but you could add cinnamon, you could add basil. I've got cute little serving cups, serving glasses here. At Christmas, my mom and I use these to do soup on the side of the big Christmas meal.
So with it, like if you were serving this, having friends over, would you have this as an appetizer? Would you have it as on the side with the meal?
I would do either an appetizer or a cool little refreshing light dessert chaser after the meal.
Yeah.
That would probably be my preference, would be after the meal. And then we've got our strawberry soup. And you can make it pretty and put a little mint.
Is that your mint?
Garnish.
Okay.
That's my mint. Ta-da!
Cute.
There you go. So 2 desserts for the price of 1, for the low, low price of 1.
Oh, briefly, nobody's asked this, but are frozen strawberries as healthy as fresh strawberries?
They are, yes. So,
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, right. They absolutely are. When we're looking at fruits and vegetables, if I'm ranking them, obviously my preference is fresh whenever possible. Next on the list would be frozen. And then next on the list, if I didn't have other options, would be canned. Canned is still better than none, right?
Yes.
So whenever you have that choice, certainly get fresh produce. But my frozen strawberries have just as much vitamin C in them as my fresh strawberries.
Yes, and they will stay in your freezer for a long time.
Yes, whereas fresh strawberries get moldy within a couple of days. And now I know, you know, there's a new hack going around to like put your berries in a jar, like a sealed mason jar.
Okay.
Dried, like don't wash them first. You bring them home from the store and you put them directly into a glass jar with a lid in the fridge. And it's supposed to keep them from going bad longer. And then when you're ready to eat them, then you rinse them, wash them. If you wash them first and then put them in the jar, you're just adding more moisture.
Right.
To keep the purpose. I have not tried this yet. I have a couple of friends doing science experiments in their fridge right now to see how long they will last. But that is supposed to be the new hack, is to put your berries in a glass jar in the fridge to keep them longer. But I always have berries in the freezer. I have cherries in the freezer right now. I have bananas in the freezer.
Cherries would be so good like that. Yeah.
You could do a combo of like blueberries and cherries, or a berry medley. Yes. And I always have those available in the freezer. So it makes it easy to put this together. So, and both, I can trade out the fruit. I can trade out the fruit here. I can use frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know that all of it's obviously the composition of the fruit is one source of versatility, but I love the idea of the crisp for a dessert because it's not so dependent on the butter or the type of flour for the texture. And so you can make different substitutions for allergies or preferences and not change it.
Gluten-free flour, like you could use almond flour if you
Yeah,
wanted
and it
to.
wouldn't be weird like it can be,
Exactly.
or challenging. I shouldn't say weird. It wouldn't be challenging.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. You can make this recipe work for a lot of different issues, sensitivities, allergies, preferences.
Yeah. Even the cornstarch, right? You could use like a tapioca as the thickener if you have a corn allergy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Leslie's saying she's making the soup, and thanks so much for all the great tips and ideas on old favorites. Yeah, the crisp is totally, I feel like, kind of reinventing. Yeah.
Right. It is. And, you know, cobblers are so good. Of course, I love a good peach cobbler, right? It's delicious. But the topping is so heavy. There's so much butter. There's so much sugar. This gives me the same flavor. It gives me the same idea.
Yeah.
With much fewer calories, much less fat, much healthier for me.
Right. It really lets the fruit shine and you get all of that benefit without the other stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and like I said, you can use it all year round and just trade out the different fruits. Now, if you're using a harder fruit, like an apple or a pear, sometimes they take a little bit longer to cook down. So that might change your cooking time, right? It may be in the oven closer to an hour, depending on how thin you cut the apple. But it's same idea, same principle. It all works. So
super.
Yeah.
Well, we've had all of our questions. We're at 12:32. Does anybody else have any other questions, or April, anything to close it out on?
Next month, we're back to a lunch and learn next month, and I think the topic is immune health, so nutrition and your immune health.
Yeah, which I did a couple months ago, I think, some immune stuff in the newsletter, so that's on the SharePoint if folks want to look at that.
Perfect. And then I don't know what the next recipe is going to be. So August, I'm not sure what we're cooking yet. Stay tuned.
Okay. We'll keep an eye out. I'm sure it'll be great.
Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today.
April.
And I hope you enjoy these. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.